If you're anything like me, you love to plan, but the execution part sometimes feels overwhelming. You have all these big goals, but now how do you actually get them done? That is the tricky part because without the action, your plans are just plans and they're not going to execute themselves. Wouldn't that be nice? So, in today's episode, I'm going to help you with some strategies for breaking your big plan into manageable chunks and keeping your team and board moving along with you. How do you make sure everybody continues to work towards the goal that we set without kind of getting distracted, especially as you get kind of halfway or three-quarters of the way through the year? Things have shifted and moved, and sometimes that's okay, but sometimes you look back at the goals you set for your organization and they don't align with where you've been headed this whole time. So today I'm going to share some tips for all of that so that you can have your fundraising, your marketing goals, your program goals all pulled together and make sure the whole team is moving forward in a concerted effort and working towards that big picture. But before we get into it, this episode is brought to you by our digital marketing therapy sessions. If you need some support from me one-on-one to work through some of these goals and aligning your marketing strategies with your fundraising plan or with anything else that you have programmatically that you have coming up in 2024, this is a perfect way to do that. They're 30-minute one-on-one sessions with me, and we can talk about anything that you need to talk about. You can book them at thefirstclick.net/office hours. And I can't wait to see you there. Let's get into the episode. You're listening to the Digital Marketing Therapy Podcast. I'm your host, Sammy Bedell-Mulhern. Each month, we dive deep into a digital marketing or fundraising strategy that you can implement in your organization. Each week, you'll hear from guest experts, nonprofits, and myself on best practices, tips, and resources to help you raise more money online and reach your organizational goals. So it all starts with your big picture goal. What are your big numbers? We're going to raise X amount of dollars this year. We're going to serve X amount of people. This is how we're going to do it. We're going to, set things in place for a capital campaign. We need to work towards getting a new building. We want whatever it is, whatever are the SMART goals, right? The actual specific goals that you have for your organization. Hopefully you now have a fundraising plan behind it. This is how much money we need to raise from the various streams in order to get there. And hopefully you have a rough marketing plan for where you're going to show up, how you're going to show up, and how you're going to get the enrollments, the new donors, retain the donors, all of the things. So you have that rough thing in place. It can still feel daunting, and sometimes different departments might move in different ways without really talking to each other. And so let's break it down so that we can make sure that we are staying on track and building in time and space to pivot if we need to. Things happen, right? COVID flipped things on their heads. Something major can happen in the news, right? And depending on the people you serve, it can make a huge impact on the work that you're doing and how you do it. So things change, and we want to make sure we have space into pivot. This isn't like a hard line, we must stay laser focused, but we want to stay as focused as possible so we don't get distracted. So the first thing that I like to do when we have an annual plan is kind of break it into quarters. So what is going to happen in Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4? So this would be placing things like your big fundraising events or an enrollment period, or just when you kind of know there are times of year that are busier. Like, what's your flow in your organization? And let's kind of plot those things, those big buckets in each of those quarters so you know what's happening. And then we're going to kind of reverse engineer from there. So let's just take your big gala, for example. It might happen in April. So now we know Q1, one of the big things we're going to be working on is getting everything in place, all the logistics, all the sponsorships, all of the things, right? That's going to be a big bucket item for Q1. Maybe another big bucket item is getting ready for a spring appeal, or maybe it is that you've determined that you need to set up some welcome sequences for your existing donors or a newsletter, whatnot, to continue to retain those donors. So maybe that's what we say are our big picture items for Q1. There are always things that are going to happen on a regular basis, right? Like hopefully you are contacting random donors. Maybe you have a list of 10 that you're going to be calling every week just to say, hey, how are you? Things like that. Those are all going to happen all the time. So once you kind of have those big bucket items in your calendar, then you can at least get super specific for Q1. But it makes it easier because you're not thinking about all of the things that are happening, right? You're thinking about how do we work through this chunk of things. So then you can get either a 6-week plan or a 90-day plan, and you can get very specific on those things. What are the things that I must do in order to accomplish what I need to do this quarter? So these again are going to get drilled down and drilled down and drilled down. So we don't want to get too specific, right? So if it's planning for your big event, maybe January or the first 6 weeks or the first the first 6 weeks is talking about solidifying sponsors, solidifying venue, event logistics, blah, blah, blah. Then the second 6 weeks is focusing more on registration, marketing communications, getting people registered. You get what I'm saying. So you have now your quarter plan that's been broken into 6-week plans. And then on a weekly basis, you're going to look at that 6-week plan and say, okay, well, now this is what I have to do this week in order to stay on track for my 6-week plan. And then every day you're going to say, okay, well, these are the 3 big things that I have to get done today in order to stay on track for my weekly goal, which is going to get me to my 6-week goal, which is going to get me to my 90-day goal. Okay. Does that make sense? And this is really something that I learned from 2 people. One, Amber McHugh, and I'll link these up in the show notes at thefirstclick.net/232. Amber McHugh, and then the Full Focus Planner has really helped me kind of pull my brain out and help me really execute. So now when I sit down to work each day, I have my list of things that I'm going to do. Let me back up. Fridays, Sundays, or Monday mornings are when I plan. Just depends on what my week is like. And I'm going to take a look at my 6-week plan. I'm going to take a look at what I did last week, and I'm going to make my week plan. I'm going to make my big 3 for the week. And then from that, I'll look at that and kind of start to map out what I'm going to do each day. So for example, I know I have podcast episodes that need to release every week. I don't want to record one every week, right? We want to record a couple of them at a time. So today I'm recording 2. So I will say, okay, look, based on my calendar, I need to schedule 2 more podcast episodes in order to stay on track with our publishing schedule. So I can do that on Tuesday. So I'm going to go ahead and write that down. Tuesday is the day that I'm going to do that. I'm going to block it on my calendar. You might have tasks that you can control, tasks that you can't. But I know exactly kind of when I'm going to plot those big 3 things that I need to get done that week to make it easy. Then each day, I'm going to look at my day and say, okay, well, these are the 3 things that I have to get done today. Everything else is a bonus. If I get these 3 things done, then I'm winning, right? Give yourself that pat on the back and celebrate. Be specific. So don't say things like, I'm going to create an email sequence. Maybe that's too much. Maybe it's, I'm going to write the first 3 emails from the sequence. And if you are in a flow and you want to do more, by all means, do more. But give yourself that space to be successful and get things done. You know the timeline and you know when it has to be created. So help yourself be successful and feel those wins, and give yourself that space to be able to be a little bit flexible. If a donor calls or there's a minor emergency and the software shuts down, Facebook goes down and all of a sudden you can't schedule things, and you've got other things that you can do and you can kind of move around that. So then you can go back and reflect, did we get everything done in our 6 week? How do we need to move forward? XYZ. I like to do my, like I said, daily plan or my weekly planning, usually either on Friday afternoons or Sunday afternoons. Do my daily planning first thing in the morning. And then I do my monthly planning the last week of the month to plan and set me up for the next year or the next month. And then usually like halfway through the last month of the quarter is when I'm going to plan in detail for the next quarter. Maybe if you have a bigger program, maybe it's in the beginning of the 3rd month of the quarter. But this is just a great way for you to stay on top of it, remind yourself of what your goals are all the time, and keep moving forward. Now, the other piece to this, like I mentioned, sometimes we have to pivot, is building in time for reflection. And however often you want to do this, totally fine. But I love it if you, at least on a quarterly basis, maybe even monthly, individually, everyone on your team can sit down and reflect on what worked well, what didn't work well, what do we want to do more of, what do we need to let go of, what's on my plate that shouldn't be on my plate, and those kinds of things. So reflecting individually and then coming together as a team and reflecting all together. You'll learn a lot about what people are spending time on, where they're frustrated. And then again, like I mentioned, sometimes things go way better than we expected. Sometimes things don't hit the mark. So these are great opportunities for you to say, okay, well, what needs to change? What do we need to address so that you don't get to year end and realize, oh my gosh, we have this huge shortfall. We have no idea how to fix it. You've been doing minor tweaks and changes within your marketing and within your strategy throughout the year to ensure that you can kind of close that gap earlier than at year end, which sometimes is something we wait and all of a sudden we look at the books and we go, oh my gosh, like now what are we going to do? And panic sets in. We don't want to do that. So really being thoughtful about reflecting monthly, quarterly at a minimum on where you've been and where you're going so that you can make sure, again, as a team, you're moving forward on the execution of the plan together. Nobody feels out of the loop. Nobody feels left out. And everybody has had a voice in why it is that we are where we're at. I think it's critical that there's no blame placed on, the things that aren't going as well, and that the whole team is celebrated for things that are going really well. I think a lot of times it tends to be very specific on the fundraising team if we're not raising money, and also just supporting the fundraising team if we're doing really well. It takes a village for all of the things to happen, and everybody needs to be doing their part. Even if it's somebody that is doing the one-on-one fundraising and doing major gift solicitation, without having the website content or the emails or the other pieces of communication to back up those conversations, I'm not saying the gift wouldn't come, but it would be a whole lot harder for that because the trust and the validation isn't existing when people are going to research and look more about your company. So celebrate as a team, reflect as a team, and use it as a brainstorming session, a productive brainstorming session where people don't feel like they're going to be attacked or that it's all their responsibility either way. So I hope that this short and sweet episode gave you some things to consider when it comes to putting your plan into action. These are just a few episodes or a few things that we do to try to ensure that we hit our goals and that we have strategies in place. So I hope some of them worked for you. I will also link up in the show notes some productivity podcasts that I love that might help you as well in this journey to make planning and executing less stressful. If you liked what you heard here today, I hope that you will subscribe wherever you listen and leave us a review while you're there. It really helps us get this podcast in front of more nonprofits that are struggling and need support as well. And the show notes will be found at thefirstclick.net/232. So thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate it. And I will see you in the next one.